Denny Hamlin crossed the finish line at Nashville Superspeedway, and the crowd was on its feet, but not just for him. On lap 8, thousands of fans raised 8 fingers into the Tennessee night sky, not for a lap count. For a man who should have been racing. For a man who was supposed to be right there in the middle of that fight, pushing from the back, clawing to the front, doing what nobody else in NASCAR could do quite the way he did it. Kyle Busch is gone, and for the first time in a very long time, NASCAR just had to go on without him. Here is what happened. Denny Hamlin won Sunday night's Cup race at Nashville Superspeedway, holding off Joe Gibbs Racing teammates Christopher Bell and Chase Briscoe in a tense final lap. It was Hamlin's 62nd career Cup victory, a number that puts him in rare company in this sport. But the story of the night was not the finish, it was the absence. Last weekend's Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte marked the first Cup race since the year 2000 with no Busch brother in the field. Kurt's career ended in 2022 after lasting concussion effects forced him out. And Kyle, who had planned to race all 3 events that weekend at Charlotte, passed away just days before the 600 at only 41 years old after a rapid battle with pneumonia and sepsis. Nashville was supposed to be his return. Instead, it became the first race where the full weight of his absence finally settled in. Let's put this in perspective. Outside of 1 suspension in 2011 and 11 races missed in 2015 after a brutal crash at Daytona, injuries that would have ended most careers, Kyle Busch was at every single Cup race for nearly a quarter century. Not just present, relevant, competitive. A factor, even when results slipped, he was always the guy you had to watch. 234 combined wins across the Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series. That is the most in NASCAR history by a wide margin. Richard Petty, the King, has 200 Cup victories. Kyle Busch surpassed that across all 3 series and did it in a way that made it look like he was playing a different game than everyone else. In the locker room, in the sport, in the culture of NASCAR, this is not just the loss of a competitor. This is the loss of the most singular talent this generation of racing ever produced. The guy who everyone loved to hate and millions absolutely loved. The guy who wore the villain role like it was custom built for him and then went out and made you regret every single time you counted him out. Here's what makes this loss so complicated to process. Kyle Busch was not just fast, he was unpredictable in a way that made every race more interesting the moment you knew he was in it. It didn't matter where he started. Back of the pack, midfield, it didn't matter. He had an almost preternatural ability to find his way to the front when it counted. Denny Hamlin said something after Sunday's race that deserves to be heard. He said Busch raised his game. He said that without Kyle as a teammate for 15 years, he doesn't win the races he's won. That is extraordinary. One elite driver openly crediting another for making him better. That's the level of impact Busch had on the people around him, not just the competition on the track, but the caliber of everyone in his orbit. Now, NASCAR faces a structural question it hasn't had to think about in a generation. Who fills that role? Not as a replacement, that's not possible, but as the new face of intensity, the guy who raises the temperature of every race he enters. Richard Childress Racing has the number 33 on track now with Austin Hill behind the wheel. A young, developing driver. Not a villain, not a showman, not rowdy, and that's fine. That's the right approach. But the sport will feel different without that unpredictable energy for a long time. There's also the generational dimension. Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., the older wave of JGR-era drivers, they all sharpened themselves against Kyle Busch for years. The next generation of NASCAR stars will never have that advantage. They will race against his legacy, against highlight reels, against what the older drivers tell them. That is a different kind of education. The response around Nashville was something you don't see often in motorsport. Fans who spent years booing the number 8 standing up on lap 8 in tribute. People who drove hours to watch a race finding themselves emotional before the green flag even dropped. The pre-race introductions felt hollow. The scoreboard felt wrong. That's what the absence of a true icon does. It doesn't just leave a gap in the standings, it leaves a gap in the atmosphere. In the rhythm of a race weekend, fans have said online that they kept looking for the number 8 on the broadcast. An instinct built up over 2+ decades of conditioning. That's not grief talking. That is just the reality of losing someone who was woven into the fabric of the sport itself. Media coverage has largely reflected the same disbelief. When a 41-year-old at the peak of his sports culture is suddenly gone, the normal frameworks don't apply. This isn't a retirement. This isn't a farewell tour. There was no goodbye. That makes it harder for everyone. NASCAR channels the emotion of this moment into something lasting. The tribute at Nashville becomes a tradition. Young drivers like Brexton Busch grow up carrying their father's number and his competitive fire back onto the track. In 7 years, when Brexton turns 18 and reclaims the number 8, it becomes one of the most meaningful moments in the sport's history. Kyle's legacy doesn't fade. It becomes the standard every new generation of drivers is measured against. Without its most polarizing personality, NASCAR struggles to hold the attention of casual fans who tuned in precisely to watch Busch either win dramatically or crash out trying. Ratings dip. The villain role goes unfilled for years. The sport becomes more competitive on paper and less compelling in practice. The number 33 runs mid-pack, the number 8 sits dormant for nearly a decade, and the sport quietly acknowledges that some voids simply cannot be filled. Denny Hamlin gave everything he had Sunday night in Nashville, and he deserves every bit of recognition for that win. But the race, and honestly, this entire season moving forward, will carry a different weight now. The sport lost something irreplaceable, and for a lot of people in those grandstands, the reality of that didn't fully land until they looked at the scoreboard and noticed the 8 was gone. Here's what I want to know from you. When you think about Kyle Busch's legacy, the wins, the rivalries, the personality, all of it, what is the single moment that defined him for you? Drop it in the comments. And if you want to be here for every conversation like this one, make sure you subscribe to SportsWire USA. We don't do surface level here.